Hi, this is Jürgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis vlog. So Netflix has a new movie out called Hypnotic that seems to be quite popular. So I thought I would do a video about Netflix hypnotic movie myths about hypnosis versus real world hypnosis. In this particular movie, you have a evil doctor called Dr. Mead who hypnotizes his clients to kill other people, harm themselves, kill themselves. It presents hypnosis as a form of ultimate mind control. In essence, if you can hypnotize someone, that equals a complete acceptance of whatever the hypnotist might say. So I thought it would be interesting to take a look at the various hypnotic stunts that Dr. Mead, the character in the movie, does to his patients and see how these claims stack up both to my own experience in seeing clients for the last 24 years, but also from what we know from research on hypnosis. So in this movie, the movie starts with a woman called Andrea who enters an elevator. And once she's in the elevator, she gets a phone call from an unknown caller, which turns out to be Dr. Mead. And he says, "Andrea, this is how the world ends." And then it looks to us, the viewer, and to Andrea, as if the walls of the elevator are coming slowly together and crushing her and causing her death. Now, of course, this was a hypnotic hallucination where Dr. Mead had hypnotized her previously, that when he said, "This is how the world ends," she would experience the elevator doors crushing her, and that would be real. And obviously had given her an amnesia for the suggestion so that she couldn't remember that it was a suggestion. So that's how the movie starts. There are other instances too where he hypnotizes a patient to try to kill a policeman. There's also a particular scene where another patient is in the car with her boyfriend, and Dr. Mead calls her and says something to the effect of, "This is how the world ends." And then she hallucinates a giant spider, which she has a phobia of, speeds the car in panic and kills herself and her boyfriend by driving into a truck. So if you watch this Netflix movie, you could very easily end up with the impression that hypnosis is a form of mind control, where a hypnotist can actually, given the right hypnotic state, control someone else's mind to that level. So let's look at some arguments for and against that being possible. Let's start with against. So as I said, I've seen clients professionally for 24 years and done a lot of work with hypnosis. Now, anyone who's done hypnotic work has had instances of being thoroughly impressed by what seemingly hypnosis, in quotation marks, can do. For example, you might have someone who smoked for decades. You get them into a hypnotic process. You offer them a bunch of suggestions that they're now a non-smoker. They come out of it, and lo and behold, they are a non-smoker. They have no urges, no issues whatsoever. Or you might have someone who's had pain for a long time, chronic pain, and you get them into a hypnotic process and suggest that the pain is gone, and it is. Or they may have had extreme trouble flying, and you suggest a new reality of them being comfortable on the plane, and they are, right? But here's the thing. I have had plenty of people who have been highly hypnotizable, done all sorts of hypnotic phenomena in the office, and who then never actually stopped smoking. Meaning, in the office, they would hallucinate stuff, they would demonstrate amnesia, they would, for all intents and purposes, satisfy anyone's criteria for this person is hypnotized, and they're there to stop smoking, right? And it looks like a slam dunk, but they come back and say, no, as soon as I left the office, the smoking urge came back, and I'm still smoking the way I used to. I've had quite a few cases like that, and any honest, experienced hypnotist will confess to the same. So that's interesting. So that has to mean that even with a highly hypnotizable subject engaged in a hypnotic process, there's no guarantee that the person's going to actualize the suggestions that you offer. And these are suggestions that the client has explicitly stated that they want, like they're paying you money, they're doing tasks, they're driving, they're coming to your office to stop smoking. They're deeply hypnotized, and they still don't realize the suggestions. So, given that every hypnotist I've ever spoken to has had that particular experience, that's a solid counter evidence that being highly hypnotizable or being deeply engaged in a hypnotic process does not guarantee that someone will actualize a suggestion. And that's a suggestion that they claim that they want on many levels, that they're actually paying to something they're paying you to help you with. Something else that I've experienced is, let's say someone comes in and you do hypnosis with them to stop smoking, and it's highly successful, right? They're bragging to everyone they know that they've tried nicotine, patches, they've tried going cold turkey in the past, they've tried all sorts of stuff. It's been terrible for them. Now, after the hypnotic process, they report, it's as if I've never smoked. So a couple of years later, they come in to do, say, weight loss. And they go into they're deeply engaged in the hypnotic process, just like they were the last time. But for some reason, the hypnotic work never affects their eating habits. So I've had this happen on quite a few occasions, that someone might accept some suggestions, but then completely reject other suggestions for another issue. So this also shows that even if someone responds deeply and powerfully to a set of suggestions regarding one particular issue, they may not necessarily respond well for suggestions to give up a different habit. So the fact that someone does some things during a hypnotic process is no guarantee that they will realize other topics. So if you think about it logically, one of the things that this kind of implies is that it's not so much what you say, it's what the client hears. It's what they're able to utilize and make sense out of. So hypnosis doesn't take away anyone else's individuality. It doesn't take away the fact that it's what the client hears. You have to present a framework and suggestions in such a way that that particular person can make sense out of them in relationship to some sort of goal that they have. So this would suggest that us hypnotists are way less powerful than the movie Netflix, the Netflix movie Hypnotic gives us credit for. Now, in the past, when I was new to the field of hypnosis, when I saw people doing dramatic changes after being hypnotized for smoking or pain control or phobias, you know, I was completely convinced that it was the quote unquote hypnotic state that made these changes possible. But there's a bunch of people who have read the book, read Alan Carr's Easy Way to Stop Smoking book, and had the same sorts of effects. There's a lot of people who have read Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules to Life, and they've had some sort of epiphany or some sort of reorganization of experience through reading that book. There's tons of people who have read one of John Sarno's books on healing back pain, for example, who report that just by reading the book, their chronic pain went away. I've had that experience with a number of chronic back pain clients, just helping them understand what's going on and offering some suggestions without any formal hypnosis. And years of chronic pain sometimes, quite often actually, goes away. So that's something interesting to consider as well. Even though there are some studies to suggest that for the highly hypnotizable folks, doing a hypnotic process can often amplify the effect of something. Let's see here. So here's a mistake that most people make when thinking about hypnosis. There's a lot of people, after watching the movie Hypnotic on Netflix, who's probably going to think, oh, I'm going to buy some books on hypnosis or buy some of these DVDs on the market so I can have that level of hypnotic influence by learning the right language patterns or by learning the right inductions. But the effects has way less to do with technicalities. It has way more to do with the social role, the perceived authority of the person delivering the suggestions, and the context in which they are delivered. So for example, let's say that you work as an engineer in some sort of company and you have a splitting headache, and some colleague gives you either a placebo drug or a real, pill that's designed to alleviate your headache and says, this is going to work, this is going to take away your headache. In the vast majority of cases, that's going to be way less effective than if the person offering that suggestion is a medical doctor in a medical coat at a doctor's office. The person who's delivering the suggestion and the context that it's delivered in matters way more than what you say. So, especially during crisis, when people are vulnerable, when people are in some sort of crisis, they tend to look to the least uncertain, So this is why physicians and surgeons who have training in hypnosis, for example, can easily often get people to stop bleeding during accidents and stuff like that, just by suggesting it, just by saying something like, I need you to stop bleeding now. And people do. Because they're looking to the person the least uncertain, and there's the perceived authority of the medical doctor. But if you're homeless and you smell really bad and you're drunk and you go up to the person in the accident who's in severe pain and tell them to stop bleeding or that their pain's going to go away, you could say the same things, but the likelihood that the person's going to respond to that is way lower. So there's this idea in the hypnosis world that people will never accept suggestions that go against their values. This is this is a strange idea because if you think about it, people act against their professed values all the time. They cheat on their diets. They may yell at their kids. They may cheat on their spouses. They may do things quite consistently that go against their stated values. So people are complex. They have a lot of competing commitments. So a friend of mine, for example, recently told me that his son had been to this eye doctor for some routine testing. And the eye doctor had said, "Man, I can't believe that you don't have intense headaches doing the work that you're doing, with this vision." And before that, he hadn't had any problems with headaches, but since then, he's had a lot of headaches. This would be an example of the nocebo effect, where given that he accepts the doctor as an authority figure, his mind has a tendency to buy into it and then realize that particular experience. So, could a hypnotist, like the elevator stunt, essentially suggest someone else's death and have it happen? Well, let's look at some arguments for, essentially, and then I'll give you my take on it. So there's a psychologist slash physiologist called Walter B. Cannon, who wrote about voodoo death, wrote many articles, and about what's called boning, where some tribal leader points at someone and essentially orders someone's death, and people actually get sick and die. So there are quite a few documented examples of this, of anthropologists, doing field reports and stuff like that. There's a guy called Base Dove in 1925. I'll read you a quick thing here, who writes about a particular case. Let me find this. So yeah, this is from Base Dove, 1925. "The man who discovers he is being boned by an enemy is indeed a pitiable sight. He stands aghast with his eyes staring at the treacherous pointer, and with his hands lifted as though to ward off the lethal medium which he imagines is pouring into his body. He attempts to shriek, but usually the sound chokes in his throat. His body begins to tremble and the muscles react involuntarily. He sways backwards and falls to the ground and appears to be in a swoon. After a short time, he becomes very composed and crawls to his wurley. From this time onward, he sickens and frets, refusing to eat and keeping aloof from the daily affairs of the tribe. Unless help is forthcoming in the shape of a counter-charm administered by the medicine man, his death is only a matter of comparatively short time." This is from Base Dove, 1925. But what you have here, though, are a fully fledged belief system supported by the culture that someone is indoctrinated and socialized into from a young age. So if you and I, who are not, part of that culture, ever got boned, or had a hex put on us by one of these medicine men, the chances of you or me dying from that is probably 0%, because we don't share those beliefs. We're not indoctrinated or socialized into that culture. The medicine man doesn't have that authority in our eyes, and our culture, doesn't support it. In our culture, you have dramatic examples of placebo effects, for example, with surgery, angina surgeries, knee surgeries. Antidepressants. People used to think, or we used to think that antidepressants worked due to chemical imbalances in the brain. Today, we know that they work due to a placebo effect because people believe in the medical doctor and they believe in theories of chemical imbalance. The chances of someone in the voodoo culture responding to that given a pill by a Western doctor is probably very, very slim. So, a hypnotist who sees a client who attempted to suggest something like that, remember that the client is coming to the hypnotist for help, to solve something. That's the context. Remember that people who are hypnotized aren't asleep or gone. So if a hypnotist started to suggest something like that, it doesn't make sense given the context. Our culture doesn't support it. I've been able to find one documented case of hypnosis where someone suggested someone else's death and it seemed to happen. I found this in the book, The Illusion of Conscious Will by Daniel M. Wegner. It's a really good book. This is on page 289. It's reported by a guy called Schrenk Notzing in 1902. It says here, in 1894, the stage hypnotist Franz Newcomb was working with a highly susceptible subject, Ella Salomon, who had experienced being hypnotized many times in his show. In the routine, Newcomb would invite an ailing volunteer from the audience up on stage, hypnotize Ella, and give her a suggestion to place herself in the mind of the patient and provide information about her health. One night, he changed his hypnotic instructions slightly and told Ella, "Your soul will leave your body in order to enter that of the patient." Ella was unusually resistant to the suggestion and said she would not do this. Newcomb firmly repeated the "leave your body" command, deepened the trance, and repeated the command again. Ella died, apparently of heart failure. So, now there could be something wrong with her heart anyways, but that's one case that seems to offer support for the notion that given the right relationship between the hypnotist and the client and the right context, something like that might be possible. But I think given the relationship that most clients have to their hypnotherapists, I think it's unlikely in the extreme that anything like that would ever happen. There's some studies in the lab, although it's really difficult to generalize studies from the lab to the real world because everyone who's in these lab studies know that they're lab studies in a university, right? So in some of these studies, for example, you have one by Orne and Evans from 1965, where you take highly hypnotizable subjects and you instruct them to throw acid in the eyes of the experimenter or to pick up a poisonous snake. Now, there's a plexiglass shield, of course, to protect the experimenter. But, 5 out of 6 subjects did that. They threw acid in the eyes of the experimenter. Now, but when they did it with people low hypnotizables who were instructed to simulate being high hypnotizables, they did the same thing. And then they did the same thing out of hypnosis, just with regular folks, giving them empathic suggestions to do the same thing, and they did the same thing. So it doesn't seem as if hypnosis per se offered anything extra in those particular cases. Uh, Again, if you go, so if you look at other cases in the movie where a patient is hypnotized to kill a police officer, like if I worked with a client who suffered from migraines or fear of public speaking or anger in their marriage or something like that, and I offer them suggestions relating to that, they might be very receptive to those suggestions. But if I suddenly started suggesting that they kill a particular police officer, um, that has nothing to do with the context that I'm seeing the client in. Like, we don't have that sort of relationship. So the idea that if someone is engaged in a hypnotic process or is highly hypnotizable, that they're automatically going to do something like that is just not the case. Now, of course, if someone's part of a cult or indoctrinated into a belief system over time, where given those beliefs and given their role in the cult, it makes sense to kill a police officer, then a hypnotic process might improve the person's behavior or be helpful. But again, that's completely outside of the scope of how the types of relationships that hypnotists have with their clients. There's this other example that I mentioned too, where Dr. Meads calls a patient and offers this post-hypnotic suggestion, and the patient hallucinates this giant spider which she is phobic of, and as a result loses control of the car and dies. You know, could that happen? Yeah, theoretically. Theoretically it could. But you have to answer, like, what would the client's motivations be to accept such a suggestion? Like how does that even make sense? So I'll tell you a little secret. For those of us who see clients for a living, it can be damn hard and difficult and grueling, with or without hypnosis, to make changes that they actually want to make and that they're willing to pay you money to help them change, and changes that people around them are enthusiastic about them making as well. I've had fear of flying clients who I've seen numerous times who have never really gotten there. And some of them have been deeply hypnotizable. So given that that can be so hard and so difficult, at least on occasion, the notion that those of us who are hypnotists have this special power to get people to hallucinate things that are going to kill them if they don't want to die or don't have a suicide wish or something like that is really, really pushing things. So I'm going to do a different video in the near future about the MK Ultra project and Manchruian Candidates and hypnosis and that sort of stuff. If this topic resonates, well, I'll go more into that sort of stuff. Let's move on with the movie. So the main character in the movie, a woman named Jennifer, who ends up on the couch of Dr. Mead, is told by Dr. Mead that there's always a root cause behind your issues. Now, this is an old kind of Freudian idea, and the idea of cause and effect in living systems seems to be a myth. There seems to be a lot of interdependent variables that influence each other, and as long as there's any element of choice in a system, this whole idea of cause and effect, meaning because of this event you're behaving like that today, like it's a cause and effect relationship, this isn't really the case. Now, You can do a hypnotic process where you kind of presuppose that, since most people believe in that, and help someone make very good changes, using that particular model. I've done so in many instances myself. But there's this idea that there's this genie-like unconscious mind in there that knows the truth with a capital T, and that hypnosis as a special state can unlock or access the so-called unconscious mind and get the answers. This is a myth. This is not true. In the past, people used to think that we could have introspective access to our unconscious mental processes, but it turns out that we don't. We don't. Sometimes we might be able to have a theory about why we kind of made a particular decision, and that theory might be accurate, but very often it's wrong. And there's a lot of psychological research to support this. I'd recommend reading Richard Nisbett's books like Mindware, for example, or his new book, Thinking, a memoir. Timothy Wilson's book, The Adaptive Unconscious, does a good job in busting through this myth. So there's a lot of interesting examples of how our left hemisphere press secretary or interpreter tends to spin stories after the fact and offer up narratives as to why we do what we do. And these stories often have very little to do with what's actually going on. Hypnosis doesn't change that. So a couple of favorite examples of this are two big studies that were done with Israeli judges, where getting parole is the answer to getting parole. The default answer is no. And where they would ask the judges, like, what do you look for? How do you make that decision in terms of when to say yes? And people would say, well, I look at the evidence, I look at this, I look at that, I make a rational, I use my intelligence. And what the researchers were able to do was to make a strong correlation between the judges' blood sugar levels and when they said yes, which kind of makes sense, because if the default position is no, then getting to a yes would require more cognitive work, and you'd be more likely to do that when your blood sugar is stable. But no one ever said, yeah, it probably has something to do with my blood sugar levels, right? And even if you hypnotize them, the chances that that answer would emerge is no more likely than unhypnotized. Or a different study that showed that female strippers got, I think it was twice the pay when they were ovulating versus menstruating. Now, if you were to ask men, why did you tip more or less, they would probably give the typical answers, but they don't, at least not consciously, have any access to the woman's ovulation cycles, right? So, could it be that the woman's behaving a bit more confidently when she's ovulating as a result of hormonal changes? Perhaps. Or could it be scent, pheromones that at the unconscious level, the men somehow pick up that she's in that part of the face, and without them knowing it consciously, who knows? But there's nothing to suggest that if you hypnotized someone and asked them to tell you the truth about that you would get a more realistic answer. So we don't have access to our unconscious processing. Take, for example, vision. When you see what appears to be a world, you see an end product. You have no access to the unconscious processing that goes into constructing the colors and the sights and the categories and all that sort of stuff. Same with hearing, same with thinking, same with feeling. We only have access to a kind of end product. And hypnosis doesn't give you any privileged access to those unconscious processes or make them visible. So that's an old myth that a lot of even hypnotists still believe in. An interesting one here too is the main character, Jennifer, after these sessions has complete amnesia for the sessions. This can happen, sometimes spontaneously and sometimes as a result of suggestion. So people, of course, people won't remember everything anyways, but sometimes people truly do report that they can't remember anything from the session. And the most dramatic thing I ever experienced was a guy I worked with for an issue, a minor issue under the NLP banner. And he came back for a follow-up, and he was very happy. And he mentioned that he had epilepsy. And I was curious. I was 21 years old at the time. And I said to him, what if we do some hypnosis and see if we can do something about the epilepsy? I'd never tried anything like that before. And he agreed. And he was a profound hypnotic subject. And we did some regression work and stuff like that. And I met him at a restaurant about a year later. And I spoke to him. And I asked him about the epilepsy. And he looked at me with complete confusion. And talking to him, it became very clear that he could remember the NLP stuff that we did. But he had complete amnesia for the fact that I did hypnosis or that we did a hypnotic session on his epilepsy. And he proceeded to tell me that the epilepsy had cleared up spontaneously not long after he had seen me. So I made sure to cut that conversation very short. So that one's possible. Let's see here too. A final one here is when Jennifer later in the movie is kind of on to Dr. Mead and tries to get him convicted for his crimes and stuff like that. She goes into his office intent on recording one of the hypnosis sessions that he does with her. And Dr. Mead is suspicious, right? So he hypnotizes her and commands her to tell the truth. And Jennifer confesses that, she's kind of onto him and collaborating with the police and recording the session and so on and so forth. So from this, you get the idea that you can use hypnosis as kind of a truth serum, to get the truth about something. This is complete and utter bullshit. People in hypnosis can lie just as easily as people who as people who are not part of. So there's no evidence whatsoever to suggest that people are any more honest or that you're any more likely to get the so-called truth during a hypnotic process. Even if you have an honest client, and they're claiming to have found the truth about something, we don't really have access. We don't really know. So very often people are more confident about what they find due to hypnosis, but it's not more accurate than it otherwise would have been. It's actually often even more distorted. So, one more thing. Dr. Mead also hypnotizes her and gives her a so-called hypnotic seal, which makes it so that she can't be hypnotized by someone else. And this is interesting. I remember Milton Erickson used to write about this, and Dave Ekman used to write about this back in the day. I have never encountered a hypnotic seal. I don't know anyone who's tried to give someone a hypnotic seal. Erickson's method, apparently, to unlock these hypnotic seals would be just indirectly to ask the client a lot of indirect questions of where they were and the sound of the hypnotist's voice, and to ask very specific questions like that, which would recreate the state, so to speak, and then he would offer very different suggestions and undo it that way. But I don't really know much about that because I've never encountered it. I never tried to do it. It seems to be completely out of fashion these days. So a couple of final thoughts for today. The first one is the general public, and unfortunately, most of the hypnotists I've met, place way too much emphasis on an alleged hypnotic state and language patterns and how you word suggestions. And they completely ignore contextual factors and situational factors and relational factors. And what occurs during hypnosis has way more to do with that than it has to do with the former. So if you're looking to buy hypnotic products, to get the powers of Dr. Mead, you're likely to be extremely disappointed. The second thing is, if hypnotists and hypnotherapists actually had such powers, don't you think that hypnotherapists would have more prestige and status and be more influential in society? Wouldn't they be at the United Nations shaking things up? Wouldn't they be doing better? Like most hypnotherapists that I know are barely scraping by financially. And even if you look at stage hypnotists who seemingly have the volunteers on stage, in their full control, yeah, in that particular context, as long as people go along with those premises, sure, people can have very real experiences, but none of the stage hypnotists are that powerful outside of the stage hypnotist context. They don't have super influence over their wife or their kids or the people in their community. Most of them are barely scraping by too. So that should give you a hint. I'd be curious to know what you make of this review and my arguments here. As always, I see clients from all over the world on Skype. If you're looking to make some changes, or looking for some mentoring, you can reach me at provocativehypnosis.com. I promise I will not try to hypnotically program you to kill anyone. And as always, thanks for listening.